Kneel before Zod!
You can't go! All the plants are gonna die!
I'm gonna take a bath.
Bad dates. I'll alert the media.
Boys, keep off the moors.
It's evil! Don't touch it!
The name's Pliskin.
No wire hanger!
Welcome to a very special Vintage Video Patreon pick, where our patrons at the $100 tier are invited to request any pre-80s title they'd like for a custom review from the Vintage Video team, overanalyzing what you've seen and spoiling what you haven't. I'm Patrick O'Reilly.
I'm Jesse Bayless.
And I'm Richard Wells.
And today, Carlos Moda has asked us to review Lifeboat, released January 28th, 1944. It was written by Joe Swerling, based on a story by John Steinbeck, with uncredited work from Alfred Hitchcock and Ben Hecht, directed by Hitchcock, and released by 20th Century Fox. This was Hitchcock's only film with 20th Century Fox, originally as a part of a two-picture deal, but the contract was dropped after a contentious production on this film. You'd think an entire film shot in one small floating set in a studio tank would be cheaper and easier, but it was not. And Hitchcock's insistence that they shoot in sequence did not help either, because they needed the entire cast around for the whole production.
Ooh.
It did not pay for itself, which is a rarity for a Hitchcock outing.
Well, even if you shot it out of sequence, wouldn't you really still need a lot of the actors?
Not if one of them dies in the first 10 minutes. You don't need that one around for the rest of the time. It seems like that actually makes it easier. But
then you make up for it on the other part.
But the problem is that they were shooting like basically 360 all day, so you needed to have this boat full of all the people. You couldn't just separate it into sections.
The reason that you tend to shoot things in sequence like that is when there's a big reveal and you want your actors not to know.
No, I think in this case it was he wanted them to realistically portray people who are in a terrible situation over time.
Oh, okay, so he just abused them more and more and more through the end of the film.
That's like Hitchcock's middle name, basically.
Like, now I'm picturing, like, Hitchcock himself throwing the buckets of water or whatever.
God.
Water.
Wait for it. It gets so terrible here. Hitchcock initially pitched a story to several novelists to expand on, including James Hilton and Ernest Hemingway on the way to John Steinbeck. An earlier draft by McKinley Cantor was rejected by Hitchcock. Steinbeck's approach was to write the story as a book and then sell the rights to Fox, but his own publishers considered it an inferior work and refused publication. So Joe Swerling and Ben Hecht were brought on to adapt his manuscript into a scripuscript. Steinbeck still made $50,000 for his draft of the film. As a result, this is considered Steinbeck's first story written directly for the screen. But Swerling did most of the work, and Ben Hecht just changed the ending for them. Steinbeck also voiced a vocal opposition to the adaptation, and in particular its treatment of the men who worked below decks and what he considered, correctly, to be a stock African-American character. He lobbied unsuccessfully to have his name removed from the final product. Stage actor Canada Lee, who plays Joe, was cast first, and the cast was meant to be a group of unknowns. Lee was reportedly given free rein to make adjustments to his own lines over the course of shooting. As you might have guessed, the constantly rocking set led to a very seasick cast. The original Gus actor, Murray Alper, left ill after 2 weeks of shooting before he was replaced by William Bendix. The original DP, Arthur Miller, not that Arthur Miller, quit mid-shoot to be replaced by Glenn McWilliams. Alice MacKenzie actress Mary Anderson was rendered seriously ill multiple times, adding to already troublesome delays in the production schedule. Even the top-billed star, Tallulah Bankhead, was stricken with pneumonia twice during production. But the worst anyone endured was Hume Cronyn, who was thrown from the ship during a storm scene and pinned beneath one of the water activators used to churn the water around them.
Oh my God.
He cracked 2 ribs and very nearly drowned before he was fished up by a set lifeguard.
Oh my God.
It's insane. To explain the absence of score during most of the film, Hitchcock reportedly said, "Where would the orchestra come from?" In response, Hugo Friedhofer, who composed the score that bookends the narrative, asked, "Where did the cameras come from?" At the time of the film's release, America was in the thick of war with Germany, and the presiding controversy in the public response to the film was that the German character of Willi was overhumanized to the point of hurting the war effort. Bankhead and Hitchcock both took issue with the complaint, suggesting that the moral of the story is clearly don't trust Nazis no matter what.
Yeah.
Which is actually kind of interesting because I thought the point was going to be, hey, we're all in this boat together kind of thing. And then it, when it takes a different turn, I was like, oh, okay, so that's not what you were going for here.
Hitchcock also added, quote, I always respect my villain, building him into a redoubtable character that will make my hero or thesis more admirable in defeating him or it. A year after the film's release, playwright Sidney Easton sued Fox, claiming Hitchcock plagiarized his unpublished play, Lifeboat No. 13, claiming he gave a copy to actor Lee Whipper, who must have shared a draft with Steinbeck. But Hitchcock maintained that the story he developed came from testimonies of real-life wartime shipwreck survivors. Bankhead reprised the role of Constance Porter for a 1950 radio play of the same story. In 1993, the film was remade as a sci-fi TV movie called Lifepod. It takes place in 2169 and tells the story of a group stranded in a life pod in the depths of space. It stars Robert Loggia, CCH Pounder, and Ron Silver, who also directed it.
Huh.
And I watched it yesterday.
Oh, did you really?
And it's fine. It's okay. They make a very interesting twist to the story, which is that there isn't a Nazi character.
Yeah.
That makes sense for space.
It would be more interesting if there was a Nazi character in space.
It's like, that's crazy that Ron Silver knew that Nazis were going to make a comeback. Who would have guessed that in 1993? But what's really interesting is that there's not a identifiable outsider. So they don't know who is sabotaging the life pod.
Oh. Do they all blame each other for being sus?
Everybody's sus, yeah. It's basically Among Us the movie, yeah.
Do they eject people from the pod?
Yeah, they do, of course.
Oh, God.
It's very Among Us, actually. Holy shit. If you remade the 1993 version of Lifeboat, you would get sued by the Among Us people.
Especially when they're trying to do tasks like slide a card through a thing.
Oh my God, that's in there. No, it's not. The film starts with all the credits over footage of a ship sinking. I noticed a credit here for Guy Pearce doing the makeup. Not that Guy Pearce, obviously. As the last smokestack disappears into the sea, we are left with nothing but churning ocean water and smoke. We see a box floating in the water that says Amcross Fragile with a Red Cross logo. It looks like supplies shipping from New York to Great Britain. We see a bunch of floating fruits, a duffel bag, an issue of the New Yorker magazine, a deck of playing cards, and a chessboard all floating on the water. We also hear voices in the distance, and the camera lands on a man floating face down in the water.
It's kind of like some symbolism here going on with just the debris, you know?
Yeah.
Like, the playing cards, chess game, it's because they're constantly reading like the newspaper.
Yeah, I think there's supposed to be something representative of each person. So the Amcross box is the medical woman, and then you have the cards because the guys are constantly playing cards. Chess is like strategy of possibly the Willi character. I guess the last thing would be the Willi character because we end on a drowned German who the tag on the back of his uniform indicates that he's a part of the U-Boat 78's crew. The camera tilts up to reveal more debris on the surface, and then we dissolve through the fog to find a lifeboat with a single passenger. Tallulah Bankhead as Constance Porter, or Connie as we'll come to know her. She sits rather calmly with her luggage and puffs on a cigarette awaiting assistance. She notices a man, John Kovac, in the water, swimming toward her and collecting paper cash bills when he sees them floating in the water. She pulls out a small film camera to record the moment. She pulls Kovac on board her lifeboat and in the process dirties her hand with the same oil slick that coats him head to toe. She asks him if he's seen Charcoal, her clever nickname for the African-American steward whose name is Joe. He apparently helped her on this lifeboat, but Kovac hasn't seen him. Kovac was working in the engine room when their boat was hit by a torpedo. She instructs him to collect several things floating by in the water, including a chair and a cap.
What are we worrying about this junk for? Let's take a look around for some of the others before that U-boat surfaces again and sees us.
She informs him that both ships destroyed each other and the U-boat won't be resurfacing. She got footage of everything that happened on her film camera, including the Germans shooting down other lifeboats.
Yeah.
He finally realizes she is Constance Porter, the famed journalist. She told the man she got footage of both ships going down, and mid-story she notices a baby's bottle full of milk floating in the water and thinks it would make a great insert in her footage.
Look! That's a perfect touch.
The man swats at the bottle with a racket he found in the water to destroy it. She's annoyed to have her shot ruined by the man, but he is disgusted by her instinct to film the bottle in the first place.
What did you do that for?
Why don't you wait for the baby to float by and photograph that?
They hear another Allied survivor calling for help, and when Kovac stands to steer the boat toward the approaching survivor, he knocks Porter's camera into the ocean, destroying all her priceless footage.
I think his attitude here towards her is really unfair. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
But there are...
It's important to document
the whole point of having journalists in war zones is to document the atrocities, not that they're cold-hearted.
I don't think he knocked this camera out of her hands on purpose.
No.
But he doesn't care about it because he cares more about the survivor. So he doesn't feel bad about doing it. But I don't think he did it intentionally.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, everybody has a role, and this was her role.
The additional survivor he's just pulled into the boat is Stanley Sparks Garrett, played by Hume Cronyn. Sparks says there are more survivors in the water and they should keep moving. When he notices a cap he recognizes in the lifeboat, Sparks calls into the fog for a Miss MacKenzie and blows a whistle. Someone replies in the distance calling to Stanley, which is Sparks' first name. We see 3 survivors standing on a small chunk of debris in the water. Constance Porter recognizes one of them as a man named Ritt, short for C.J. Rittenhouse. One of the other 2 is a man with an injured leg named Gus Smith, and another woman helps the injured man on board. She must be Miss MacKenzie. Alice MacKenzie appears to be some kind of medical professional and takes care to help Gus with his injured leg. Kovac gives Ritt the cash he found floating on his way to the lifeboat when he overhears the man talking about winning at cards and his prize going into the water. Miss MacKenzie pulls out some shrapnel from Gus's leg and offers it to him as a souvenir. He tosses it overboard. The man is very concerned that he might be sent home with a bum leg from this injury because he's an accomplished dancer. Gus and Porter try to make a deal for some alcohol, but MacKenzie advises against it. Suddenly, they hear another voice calling from the fog.
It's charcoal!
Porter spots Joe, the steward, aka Charcoal, in the water, carrying a woman over one shoulder and a dead baby over the other shoulder. The steward, Charcoal, is played by a black guy, which is why she's calling him Charcoal. And that's ridiculous. And it wasn't in the manuscript that Steinbeck turned in. That's
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I also realized that what they have against Connie here is probably more about her wealth than her status as a journalist.
Right.
Because like even
she's in a fur coat, she has all of her luggage.
Right.
She was never in the water.
She's not actively trying to save anybody here. And when her camera goes in and she talks about like I would have given $1 million for that. Why didn't you jump in and grab it? You know, like it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't unsalvageable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but nothing is so precious to her as to try to work for it.
I think when she says I would give $1 million, it's the same as if I drop something overboard and I say I would have paid $5 to not drop that overboard. It's like I'm not going to get in the water for it.
Yeah.
Because $1 million means nothing to me. Joe mentions that when he found her, it seemed like the woman was trying to drown her baby. A serious look from MacKenzie communicates that this child is beyond saving, but the mother still snatches the baby away.
Best let her have it. We'll wait till she's asleep.
It's like, you don't have to say that out loud. It's right there. It's a small boat. Sparks seems familiar with the passenger, Mrs. Higley, and her child, John. Apparently, she was in a state of shock before the ship even sank.
Her name's Higley. She's bombed out in Bristol. One of them show-shock cases sent to America. Her child was born in New York. Said to me on the ship, I'm going home to show my husband the baby.
The injured man notices a pair of hands scraping their way over the side of the lifeboat, and when the man is pulled into it, he thanks them for saving his life.
Thank you, schön.
Uh-oh. Porter has to translate for the German U-boat sailor we will come to know as Willi, because she's the only one who speaks his language.
He said thank you.
Oh, is that what he said? Thank you for translating.
Oh, Richard, you're so useful here.
Thank you, darling, thank you. That's a song. I translated for you. I guess I should have said darling in German. I don't know how to do that. The other passengers ask why he shelled their ship, and he assures them he was only following his captain's orders. He claims to be a lowly crew member, but Sparks calls BS already. Kovac insists on throwing the man overboard.
Throw him off.
Have you gone out of your mind?
Throw the Nazi buzzard overboard.
That's out of the question. It's against the law.
Whose law? We're on our own here. We can make our own law.
Now, just a minute.
Porter,
put it in the tea.
Put him in the water. Porter takes the German side surprisingly strongly, accepting that the man fired on an enemy ship just as any of them would have done if ordered to. I feel like if any of these passengers beside the shell-shocked woman had lost family in the attack, this Nazi would be dead right away. There's no way that they would all agree, okay, you sank the ship, but we're all fine, let's just go home. Kovac tells her this man shelled a ship with innocent passengers and even their lifeboats, which is not the same as war, even though, as we've seen, the ship was transporting materials to support Britain in the war effort. Kovac is suddenly suspicious of Porter with her fur coat and fluent German. Kovac reiterates that he will dance a jig as soon as this German drowns, and Gus, the injured man, takes Kovac's side. He explains that his last name was Schmidt, but he had to change it because he was so ashamed of his own name. Sparks points out that the law dictates that prisoners of war be treated a certain way and not summarily executed. MacKenzie says she doesn't understand any of this killing talk because she only wants to help people. She agrees with Sparks' approach that they treat him according to the requirements of the Geneva Code. Porter says she will interrogate the German, and someone points out it will make a lovely chapter in a book for her down the line. Suddenly, the shell-shocked woman notices her baby is dead, and she tips forward, dumping it into Willi's arms. But then, immediately, she starts swatting at him to steal the baby back. She cuddles it in her seat as though everything were fine. Some of the men on board start discussing the official prayer for burial at sea. Do you guys recall the last time we saw a burial at sea?
Was it Herbie?
Nope.
The Herbie movie?
Nope, more recent than that.
Seamen, do your duty.
Death ship?
Unto Almighty God, we commit her soul, and we commit her body to the deep.
Herbie was more recent than Death Ship. It wasn't a whole body.
Ordinary people?
Ouch.
I don't think that was a burial.
Ouch.
That was an accident. He went in alive, but then so did Herbie, I guess.
Jaws 2?
It was just a hand.
The hand?
Close.
Oh, it was the messenger of death. Demonoid?
Demonoid messenger of death.
Earth to the sea, ashes to the depths, dust to eternal rest, in hope of no resurrection.
They each take guesses at the proper prayer, but of course Joe, the African-American stereotype, is the only one who has it memorized.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
The passengers sort all the available supplies on board and prepare to sleep for the night, with watchmen staying up in shifts to keep an eye on the enemy combatant, and perhaps each other. The shell-shocked mother wakes up and is surprised to find a mink coat draped over her to keep her warm in her sleep. Of course, everyone's on edge because they're waiting for her to notice that they've thrown her baby overboard while she was sleeping. Save that kid for jerky, guys. You don't know how long we're going to be out here.
Whoa.
Just saying.
What have you done with him? What did you do with my baby?
Your baby's dead. Don't you remember?
Surprisingly, she doesn't completely freak out and begins calmly speaking to the ocean to reach her son. When she starts to lean overboard as if to join him, the other passengers decide to tie her up so she doesn't kill herself. At daybreak, Sparks awakens to find Rit also asleep. It turns out the German was awake alone. Rit asks how much they might have drifted in the night, and Sparks tells him that with the anchor down they should hold pretty well in place. He's actually been shipwrecked twice before, and the longer time he spent 43 days at sea awaiting rescue. Though on that particular voyage the lifeboat was well stocked compared to this one. They try to put together a water breaker to keep potable water in, but they fail and are destroyed by the rough seas. Even their compass was somehow destroyed, and it sounds like Sparks is hinting at sabotage. When Constance is awakened, she complains about the bitter cold and wishes she didn't give her mink coat up, at which point they all realize that the shell-shocked woman has jumped overboard wearing it. All that's left of her is a rope she was tied up in, hanging over the side of the boat. Her empty chair is sitting in the middle of it. So she either killed herself, trying to get to her kid, or the German killed her in the night.
Yeah.
But either way, so the rope that she was tied up with is taut.
It looks taut, yeah.
And I know this is terrible, but I feel like I would have pulled it back up and salvaged the coat because you just need all these sort of supplies, right?
Is that what they're implying, though, that she's on the other end of that rope?
I thought so.
I think so.
I mean, because one of the guys, I think it's Joe maybe, or somebody takes a knife and cuts it.
Yes. Yeah, somebody does and then throws it overboard.
And then.
But it's like, first of all, rope is precious now on this lifeboat.
So is that mink coat.
And other stuff, and mom jerky tastes just as good as baby jerky.
Hey, well, Lord, use it to catch some fish.
Yeah.
Is that terrible? That's terrible.
That's pretty terrible.
It's terrible, but also realistic when you're on a lifeboat and you have no idea how long you're going to be at sea. But you might also investigate this situation a little bit to see if it looks like she was beat up before she was thrown overboard.
Or if it's a noose that's around her neck.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that they should have looked at least before just cutting the rope and throwing her over. Ritt apologizes for not preventing the apparent suicide, but admits that it was pitch black last night and he had no hope of preventing it. We get a quick shot of Willi consulting a compass and then tucking it back into his pocket. Now, it's also possible that all Willi did was untie her so that she could do this to herself.
Yeah.
Or just
so it's like a combination of suicide and betrayal.
Or for all we know, he could have just watched her, wriggle loose.
Right.
But we'll never know.
Right.
I mean, we will know that he's fine with decreasing the number of people in this ship.
Yes, that makes sense. That morning, they begin to work on a sail to help them coast to safety, and Ritt assigns everyone a position on the ship. He says Sparks is in charge of navigation, George, a.k.a. Joe, is the head of commissary, Porter is in charge of the ship's log, and she demands publication rights, including the Scandinavian.
Well, you're calling him George.
I'm about to go into it.
Yeah.
Rich will continue to call Joe George over the course of the film, and this is a reference to George Pullman, who owned a line of passenger trains. Because it was staffed by recently emancipated slaves, it was commonplace for these stewards to accept their boss's name as their own. That way, passengers would automatically know the name of a steward and could address them specifically.
How is it addressing somebody specifically when you use a generic
Because
name?
you don't have to say, sir, guy, person.
Well, you don't have to be respectful?
If you say George, they'll turn around and they'll help you. Amusingly, this changed over time not because it's crazy racist to name a man's employees after him, but because rich guys named George didn't like being affiliated with black people and demanded that stewards be addressed by their own names presented on name tags.
Wow.
So progressive.
Yeah. Great for them. MacKenzie is in charge of sickbay, and Sparks points out that Ritt seems to have elected himself skipper to make all these decisions alone. Kovac is still advocating for tossing Willi overboard.
What are you afraid of? He's 1 against 7.
It was 8 yesterday, or have you forgotten?
It could have been 9, but...
Yeah, but we killed that baby. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
8.5. This is a Fellini movie all of a sudden. Gus reads a newspaper, and on the side of the page facing us, we see an ad for Reduso, the sensational new obesity slayer, and the accompanying before and after photos are both of director Alfred Hitchcock, who, as we discussed in our Frenzy review, made a habit of small cameos in his films. His initial intent was to play a floating body, just as we saw him later in the trailer for Frenzy. The weight loss product Reduso would be referenced again in Hitchcock's Rope 4 years later. Gus is reading an article about a crew stranded at sea for 80 days. Then he tells the story of his dance accomplishments, including an 80-hour marathon dance. At the end, his girl, Rosie, went right to another club because she wanted to dance more. Gus worries his leg injury might take him out of the game and that Rosie might ditch him for Al Magarulian, a rival dancer, who she knew first. Porter hands Kovac an expensive piece of jewelry, asking him to fix it because it's like, oh, you worked on a boat, you can fix clasps, right?
Yep.
He's surprisingly familiar with her work and complains that she doesn't get enough out of her own perspective in her writing. They raise the sail, and Ritt asks the navigation head, Sparks, to decide on a course. They can't even agree which direction is which, let alone which one they should be headed in, and Willi suggests a direction. Kovac thinks it's a trap and doesn't want to use the Nazis' directions. For some reason, everyone else on the boat endorses Willi's plan, but when Kovac points out that Ritt is just a rich dude who doesn't know about ships, he suggests a new election to decide on a skipper. Porter thinks that a guy who worked in the bowels of a ship is no match for a captain, which she assumes Willi to be, despite his claims.
He wasn't the captain.
Wasn't he? The captain?
Yeah?
He accidentally responds to her calling him the captain, and for some reason, this is all the proof everyone needs that this German is trustworthy in leading them to safety.
Yeah.
Like, what? He just fucking lied to us. And that means that he shot our ship on purpose to kill all of us.
And gave the order to shoot
to other people to do it. Yeah.
Well, and to shoot the lifeboats.
Yeah. He's a monster. He just admitted to you he's a monster. And you're like, see? He's a monster who's controlled a ship before.
No, see, he's a qualified monster.
Oh, okay, that's true.
The devil you know, I guess.
Yeah. This reminds me of the SNL sketch that you shared. Christopher Walken is when they're holding the election to decide who's going to be the new captain of the ship.
Yeah. Enough of this guy. Boo.
You threw our oar at a seagull. I can't help it. They're so close. They're like flying optical illusions.
That was our last oar. There's nothing to stop the seagulls attacking now.
Gus, Sparks, MacKenzie, and Joe quickly endorse Kovac as skipper. Willi warns that the direction Sparks is recommending will take them further into the ocean and away from Bermuda where they're trying to go. As they adjust the sail, the boom sweeps Porter's typewriter into the ocean. She mourns all the things she's lost so far, her camera, her coat, and the typewriter. Kovac challenges Rit to a game of cards using a deck he just made from Porter's extra blank papers. She asks him about all the tattoos of initials on his chest, and he says they were all women, including right in the middle it says BM really big, which I've seen cited as a toilet reference because Hitchcock has a toilet reference in so many of his films.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Remind me to show you the rest of them sometime.
MacKenzie admits to Sparks that she always had a fear of blood, and she's surprised she ended up in medicine.
So let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Were they sailing to England or from England?
To England.
To England from New York.
To England from New York.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the best course of action then wouldn't be to try to hit an island that's a small point versus...
It depends on where they are.
Yeah, I guess...
If they had to take the South Atlantic.
Yeah, it just seems like pointing the boat towards west, you'd be more likely to run into other ships.
Yeah, well, someone also says something about going to Bermuda anyway. Like their plan was to meet someone in Bermuda.
Right.
It's
I think that was a
the
coaling station or something.
Yeah, so maybe they're close enough to Bermuda that they were going to refill there and then go to New York, and that's where they got attacked.
Bermuda doesn't seem to be on the way between New York and England, though.
Well, you don't go straight, though, in a boat or, like, even in a plane. You go over the North Pole when you're going to London from, like, Los Angeles because there's currents that you have to stay in. Sparks admits that when you're under attack like this, it's really frightening the first time, but this isn't his first rodeo. MacKenzie confesses that she's glad the ship was torpedoed for some reason, and everyone is very upset by the comment, which she doesn't get a chance to explain here. Gus complains his bandages are too tight, and when MacKenzie takes them off, Willi identifies the resulting mess as a gangrene-infected wound. He insists an amputation is necessary to save Gus's life. MacKenzie is not comfortable performing an amputation, but Willi is, with the patient's permission. Gus rejects the offer, not because Willi's a German, but because he can't dance without his leg.
Don't be a sap, Gus.
You don't understand.
Sure I do. Rosie.
What's Rosie got to do with this?
Everything. If I lose my leg, I lose Rosie.
You're going to lose the leg either way, so you only have things to gain here. Kovac and Porter suggest that if Rosie leaves him for losing a leg, then he deserves better. They keep referring to Rosie as that kind of woman.
I don't know Rosie, but I know women. Some of my best friends are women, and one of them's that kind of a...
What kind of a...
Well, an independent creature who lives her own life.
Porter tells him that if he dies of gangrene, he will break Rosie's heart, especially when she learns that he didn't accept the surgery because he didn't trust her not to leave him. Gus changes his mind and agrees to the operation, and Porter gives him a bottle of brandy to prepare. Willi washes his hands, and they collect the necessary tools. There must be a bit of a time jump here, because Gus is instantly wasted. It seems like it happens over the course of like 5 seconds. Like there's one shot where he's sober, and without cutting, he's suddenly drunk.
Well, I guess we can also assume that they probably haven't been rationing their water.
Yeah.
So it
would affect him quickly, but not this quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
Before they get started, Gus asks for a kiss from Porter, and she obliges. Gus asks Joe to play some music and skips the first song, preferring the second song, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me. The passengers hold their hands up to keep the lighter out of the wind while they heat up a knife to perform the surgery with. Right before they begin, Gus punches Kovac in the face for some reason. I guess because of what he said about Rosie, calling her that kind of woman. The wind kicks up just as they get started, and Sparks does his best to keep the boat steady. Sparks notices Rit is about to vomit and calls to Joe to get him pointed overboard so he doesn't throw up in their boat. We end the surgery scene with Kovac tossing one of Gus's boots onto the floor of the boat. We dissolve to later, and we get another shot of Willi with his compass. He tells the rest of the passengers, through Porter, that without a compass, he can't be certain of anything, but he thinks they're close to Bermuda. After some more arguing in German, Willi admits to Porter, for some reason, that they aren't headed for Bermuda, but Kovac still insists they are. When he asks all the passengers for their opinions of which way to go, they all suggest following Willi's recommendation. Kovac accepts this ruling and defers to Willi's expertise. That night, Porter is talking with MacKenzie about her jewelry, specifically a bracelet her first husband gave her, and reminds MacKenzie what she said about being glad the ship was torpedoed. MacKenzie is immediately backtracking. It sounds like she wanted to die because she was in love with a married man.
Of course, I don't know who the guy is, but I know men, especially married men. Some of my best friends.
MacKenzie moves to the back of the boat to tell Sparks her whole life story about the married man she was in love with, and he sees how hopeless it all was. As they talk more, it occurs to Sparks that he can see the wrong planets on the horizon if the boat was pointed toward Bermuda, as Willi claims.
This was another thing that bothered me, because this isn't their first night.
Right, and every day the sun goes over them, and they should notice which way is east and which way is west.
Yeah. It really bothered me that, I mean, I can understand, like, I worked in an engine room, but you have to have some kind of maritime skills to work on a ship, period.
I mean, maybe not during wartime. Sometimes you get desperate, and but I get it that...
That's why Sparks has been through 3 shipwrecks in his life, because he's just a fucking idiot.
But when the sun's like straight overhead, which happened when they first...
Yeah, right. But then 2 hours later, it wasn't straight overhead.
Then you figure it out when the sun starts to move.
Yeah, and
especially with a mast on your ship, it's like you have a shadow to work with to determine the direction. For some reason, they wait a few more hours before bringing Willi's scheme to everyone's attention. Rit thinks Willi has a compass, and MacKenzie mentions to Porter that he keeps checking what looks like a watch, but still asks other people for the time. They ask Joe, the expert pickpocket, to check Willi's pockets as he sleeps, and after some hesitation, he reminds them that he swore off picking pockets. Porter says it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Some of my best friends are pickpockets. Joe is ordered to mug the man and comes back with the compass. Kovac opens a knife intending to stab Willi for his ploy. Everyone else talks him out of it while a storm kicks up. The waves get crazier and crazier until Sparks is literally thrown overboard, but then miraculously, a second wave throws him back into the boat. Willi orders them to bail the boat before it sinks, and Porter suddenly realizes he's speaking English. The mast snaps and the sail collapses into the ocean along with Porter's suitcase. She's lost another prized possession. As waves continue to crash, Kovac holds Porter tight and says they should die together.
We might as well be down together, ain't Connie?
Hours later, the sea is calm, and Willi is rowing and singing in German, while Rit plays Joe's flute. Porter is sleeping in Kovac's lap on the opposite end of the lifeboat. Everyone volunteers to take a turn rowing for Willi, but he says he's fine. They're surprised at his endurance and suspect it's a result of him being part of the master race. Willi asks how Gus Smith is doing, but uses the last name Schmidt, which Gus objects to. Gus starts asking people baseball questions, but then they realize he's kind of out of it when he suggests he might try to go to today's game with Rosie. Willi keeps making requests of German songs he has taught to Rit on this flute, and the man dutifully plays them for the Nazi lyre. At the back of the boat, Porter and Kovac play a bit of footsie, and Gus sneaks a mug into his obsolete boot, intending to dip it over the side and collect seawater to drink. Sparks keeps untying MacKenzie's hair to annoy her because he thinks it's funny. And it is. MacKenzie notices Gus's scheme and tosses the seawater overboard. Porter admits to Kovac that she liked what he said in the storm about dying together.
Die together like that? Dying together is even more personal than living together.
She confesses that she grew up in the same neighborhood as him, but she married a rich man, and so she adds her initials with lipstick to his chest, and they kiss. He tosses her off.
Quit slumming.
And walks away to play cards with Rit. They get on the subject of food, and as Rit describes a bunch of luxury meals, Porter starts to go crazy. She blames him for their whole situation, but Kovac diagnoses it as a clear result of hunger. Porter eventually breaks down, and Gus grabs a hold of his mug again. Kovac is winning lots of money from Rit and starts to wager Rit's own factories in the games. Kovac is keeping a tally of his winnings on the boat bench. Right when Rit thinks he's finally won the whole pot back, a sudden breeze tosses all the cards overboard, and he's furious.
See you, Rittenhouse. What have you got?
I've got... Oh! That was my pot. You couldn't possibly beat me.
I have a full house.
And I had 4 deuces.
How do I know you had 4 deuces?
He accuses Kovac of somehow orchestrating the breeze when suddenly it's raining, so they try to collect rainwater in the sail.
But he's not just accusing him of the breeze. He's accusing him of marking the cards.
Yeah.
Like, it's worse than that.
But if he was winning the pot back at the end, then obviously Kovac wasn't marking the cards.
I mean...
Unless he orchestrated the wind. Like, that would be the whole point of that, is to prove that the cards were legitimate, is that, oh, well, you had the winning hand, though, and then they all got blown overboard.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I mean, he made the cards. Like, these are just bits of paper with, words written on them. So
I think Rit is also forgetting that the first time that Kovac heard Rit say anything, he was saying, I won a bunch of money, and it fell in the water, and Kovac immediately gave him a 20 back that he found in the water.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like, this is an honorable guy. He's not trying to cheat anyone unfairly out of their money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it only rains for about 4 seconds, and disappointed, Gus dips his mug overboard to drink seawater instead.
You just start licking that sail.
Yeah.
That's what I'd be doing.
I'd do that anyway.
Sail
Love
liquor.
Those sails. Sail liquor. Liquor sail. In the middle of the night, Gus seems intoxicated by the salt water and blathers to Willi as he continues rowing. He notices Willi is sneaking sips of water and tries to tell his sleeping fellow passengers, but nobody listens to him. Willi tells Gus to stay quiet so he doesn't wake everyone, and then points to Rosie off the side of the boat. Gus prepares to leave and join Rosie, and they shake hands to part ways. Gus asks if there's any way that he can repay Willi, and Willi suggests that Gus change his name back to Schmidt. He agrees to for the last 5 seconds of his life. When Gus leans for her, Willi pushes the man into the sea. Gus cries for help from Sparks, but Sparks sleeps through it until Gus has completely disappeared under the water. Everyone is very mad at Willi for not bringing it to their attention that Gus was drowning, but he says it would have been meaner to save the crazed man.
The best way to help him was to let him go. I had no right to stop him, even if I wanted to.
Sparks somehow recalls that Gus was talking about Willi having water while he screamed for help. They notice Willi has tears in his eyes and sweat on his brow. Joe pulls the bottle of water out of Gus's shirt, and it is dropped to the deck and shattered. Willi admits he has food pills, too, which explains why he's been so energetic compared to the rest of them. Willi admits to the group that they are not headed for Bermuda, but a supply ship, and then everyone freaks out and throws him overboard, like of course they would.
Yeah.
As Willi fights to stay on board, Rit cracks him over the head multiple times with Gus's boot, the only thing they have left of him. I kind of thought it would be funny if, as Willi disappeared beneath the waves, his last words were, "Tell Rosie it wasn't gangrene." Like he just cut off Gus's leg for no reason and could have survived the trip. Rit is flabbergasted that this man they had extended so much courtesy to would try to kill them.
First, he tried to kill us all with his torpedoes. Nevertheless, we fished him out of the sea, took him aboard, shared everything we had with him. You'd have thought he'd have been grateful. All he could do was to plot against us. Then he let poor old Gus die of thirst. What do you do with people like that?
They're now stranded at sea with no idea which way to go. Sensing the situation's hopelessness, Sparks asks MacKenzie to marry him, and she agrees. Porter is furious to see everyone giving up, and Rit says his only regret is having joined a mob to kill a Nazi that betrayed them. Porter says that they all joined a mob by letting the Nazi mislead them this whole time. Worth pointing out, too, that when they decide to kill the Nazi, the only person who doesn't participate in the murder is Joe.
Yeah.
He's just standing back and letting them do what they do. Porter suggests catching fish with her bracelet as bait. It's like, why didn't you suggest this days ago, weeks ago?
You cut a leg off that you could have been using as bait.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't need to just toss that away.
Yeah. They quickly catch the attention of a large fish and pull it on board with the bracelet. Like, literally 3 minutes later, they have a fish in their hands. But before they can start taking bites of this fish while it's still alive, Joe points out a ship on the horizon, and they drop the fish and Porter's bracelet overboard. She has officially lost everything, and she's back to where she was when she lived in Kovac's town. She laughs, crazed at her situation. Unfortunately, the ship they saw is the German supply ship, and a boat comes out to collect them. But Porter is willing to settle for this rescue.
Well, some of my best friends are in concentration camps.
And I like that the German calls out to him, "Hello." What
Like,
did he say?
He's like, oh, he said they have coffee or something.
What?
Suddenly, a flashlight signal from the supply ship orders the boat back, and the shipwrecked passengers are abandoned at sea. An American ship on the horizon begins firing on the supply ship and the German lifeboat. Sparks and Kovac frantically row the lifeboat out of the path of the German supply ship. The supply ship is quickly struck and sunk by the American attack. If they hadn't killed Willi, they might have found this supply ship sooner and already boarded in time to die on it.
Well, and isn't this showing them that the Americans are just as bad shooting
at lifeboats? Yeah. Kovac suspects the American ship is now only 20 minutes away, and everybody celebrates a bit. Porter starts doing her makeup so she looks nice for the Americans.
Oh, here, darling.
No, darling. You first.
Yes, darling, yes. Because one of my best friends is in the Navy.
Nice, mighty nice.
Ritt promises Kovac all the money he won at cards, and Porter suggests he spend it replacing all of her things he's thrown overboard. Suddenly, another pair of hands come climbing over the outside of the boat. Another German, but now a much younger one. Porter thinks he's too young to be a captain, and they should treat this man better than Willi, but the kid quickly has a gun on them.
He's helpless, he's only a baby.
The baby has a toy.
I should have frisked him.
They manage to wrestle the gun away and throw it overboard, and the kid asks a question.
Werden Sie mich nicht umbringen?
He says, aren't you going to kill me?
I'll have to tie this up till the ship's doctor takes care of it.
Aren't you going to kill me? What are you going to do with people like that?
I don't know. I was thinking of Mrs. Higley and her baby. And Gus.
Well, maybe they can answer that.
As the passengers await the arrival of the American ship, we fade to black. The end. Lifeboat, everybody. It's a good one. I like it. I like the characters. I feel like it all makes sense.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised that there wasn't some kind of a turn that the Nazi ended up being a good guy or helping somebody in some way. And you could argue that, oh, well, he steered the ship to safety when the storm got crazy and he performed this surgery on Gus's leg. But I'm convinced that the surgery was not necessary and he was doing it to demoralize people. But yeah, I really liked it. I thought.
But he didn't propose the surgery.
He was the one who said it was gangrene.
Mm-hmm.
But
if it wasn't gangrene, they wouldn't have had to amputate the leg.
But I guess she was just a nurse, but she was the one that unwrapped it and said that the leg looked bad.
Yeah. Well, she also said that she has a difficult time with blood. And so him taking off the bandages was just to show a really nasty wound that might have been okay if it had just been bandaged up and you know, they changed the bandages often enough. But Willi was the one who said, that's gangrene and you need to cut that leg off or you're not going to survive. And if that was true, which I think the film implies that it's true,
Sure.
I'm taking a leap here, then that's the only true thing that Willi said. He lied about being the captain. He lied about which way they were going. He lied about what they were headed towards. He lied about whether he had a compass. Yeah. He lied about whether people jumped off the boat themselves or he shoved them overboard.
Yeah.
Everything we heard him say and knew the truth of, we knew he was lying. So that's why I think it wasn't gangrene, and he cut off this guy's leg just to fuck with him. And that Gus would have survived if he hadn't gone through with the amputation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thumbs up for sure on this one. I don't think a Hitchcock movie is going to get a thumbs down, really.
I definitely give it a thumbs up. I was fully engaged the whole time. I liked the characters, and I think it was interesting. It didn't end up going, like you said, it didn't end up going the way I thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
But it makes sense for the way it went, considering that we were still dealing with Nazis
at the time directly. Yeah. That's why I was like, watching the movie, I was very surprised when the second Nazi pulled out a gun, and I was like, wow, they're really like hitting the Nazis hard in this movie. And I would have expected that Hitchcock to try and subvert our expectations and have one or the other Nazi be a good guy to break everyone's like prejudice. But It's like, you can't really do that, which is probably why they brought Ben Hecht on to be like, hey, you need to change the ending. The Americans all have to survive on an American ship, and every Nazi has to try and murder everyone.
Yeah.
And I love that the controversy was the Nazis are too nice. And it's like, the Nazi was the monster the whole fucking time. I think if anyone was upset about something, that really the problem is that the Nazi was smarter than the Americans for most of the movie. And they were like, why is he so much smarter than them? That's the part that I can see people getting upset about.
Right.
It's a thumbs up for me for sure. I there's so many of Hitchcock's movies that I have not seen.
Yeah, that's
I'm ashamed
true.
to say. And so this was a delight that I had not seen. This
is also by far the oldest movie we've covered on the show, which is fun to do.
What's the next oldest one we've done? Have we done anything before the 70s?
No, this is our first before 1970 title.
But yeah, I thought all the characters were great, really well rounded. Like I was actually expecting more people to die.
Yeah, I kind of was too, because there's so many on the boat by the end.
And I didn't expect it to be and then there were none kind of situation.
Yeah.
But I expected at least like one or two to get picked off more.
Well, I really suspected that when the kid pulled out a gun after they had a second debate on whether they could trust this Nazi,
right?
I figured that this guy was going to pull out a gun and shoot Joe. Just Joe. And then it would be like, he didn't even kill the first Nazi. He's the only one who got killed by this Nazi after everyone said we should throw him overboard. And then people said, no, don't do it. And then he would have killed Joe.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened.
Yeah.
And that might be because they were just trying to clean it up, make it a little bit happier of an ending. Because it does end on a very, positive note.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions that I had. They mentioned that they were barely able to get out a distress signal. And I don't know if this ship that's arriving is arriving in response or just was a happenstance.
I mean, it seems to be a battleship. It's a Navy ship. I don't think it's just a rescue mission.
But also I still question, I'm still fuzzy about where they are in the ocean and why they're trying to head to Bermuda and how close they are, in relationships to that. Because Bermuda is really far out there.
Yeah.
But it still seems to me like you're going to have a better chance of hitting a cargo ship or patrol ships along the coast if you head back towards the United States.
Yeah, just aim, and you have a much wider area to actually hit some land as opposed to Bermuda, which is just a tiny little island.
Yeah, you could miss Bermuda very easily as opposed to just sailing west and eventually you'll hit something.
Yeah, there's a lot of land in every direction. You just
take
have to
the Columbus route. Just head that way. Hit something.
I was talking to my coworker Perla about we're doing Lifeboat, and she recommended as a double feature with it a movie called 7 Waves Away. It's also called Abandoned Ship or 7 Days From Now. And it came out a little bit later. It's 13 years later. It's a British film, and it's Tyrone Power is the captain, or he's the skipper. He's in charge of the lifeboat full of people. It's another shipwreck at sea, and I think, but in that example, it wasn't because they encountered an enemy. They literally hit a mine in the ocean, and so in this version of the story, the lifeboat has 50 people in it, and it's overloaded, and there's a bunch of people that have to swim around it, and they're trading off because too many people in the boat would cause it to sink, but they're constantly bailing it anyway. And there's also sharks in the water, which is that much scarier, but in that situation, they come to terms with the fact that their only option is to sail 1,500 miles to Africa, which they decided would take 50 days of constant rowing.
Oh, God.
And it's a nightmare. But it's a really interesting film, and eventually they get to a point where supplies are running so low that Tyrone Power, as the man in charge, decides we can't support everyone here. So anyone who's not pulling their weight, we're going to kill that person. And he's not putting it to a vote. He's not asking for volunteers. He says, I will be the decider because someone has to. And he starts killing people off one at a time. And people object to some of the killings. Some of them make perfect sense that almost nobody could argue with it. But then there's a really terrible storm one night. And if they want to survive more than 48 hours past this storm, they need to kill more than half of who's left. And so he just starts killing people willy-nilly. This guy's dead. Shove him off. Get him out of here. And the next morning, the sea has calmed down, and everyone's like, we couldn't have survived for very long if you didn't do that. you're the best captain ever. Thank you so much. And then a fucking rescue ship shows up on the horizon.
Ugh.
And they're all like, but we only did that because you had a gun. And this is all your fault. It was all your decision. You said it before. Like, they just immediately turn on him.
Right.
So that it's like he did what he had to do to save everybody, but it turns out he didn't have to do that to save everybody. And it's
but
really,
you don't know that. You don't know that until it happens.
Right. But it's really great. And I just spoiled the whole thing, so you don't need to watch it. But
but you should definitely watch it.
But you should. I think it's a good double feature with Lifeboat. They're very similar films. And they discuss a lot of the same things in both movies. It's clear that movie was inspired by this movie.
Yeah.
I also think about The Simpsons, where Homer, Flanders, and Bart are on the they're trying to catch the fish.
Oh, right, yeah.
You'll thank me when we're frying up a big fish.
Actually, now that I think about it too, that other movie that I mentioned is also based on a true story.
Lifepod?
No, not Lifepod. Yeah. I mean, it will be based on a true story. It just hasn't happened yet. Our director here was Alfred Hitchcock. So far, we've reviewed one of his last director credits, Frenzy. He's probably one of the best-known directors of all time. He's celebrated as the master of suspense. He directed The 39 Steps, Rebecca, Spellbound, Rope, Strangers on a Train, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, and The Birds, among many others. He also created the anthology series Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which ran for a whopping 268 episodes. John Steinbeck wrote the story, or the manuscript that was adapted into the script. He's an author best known for Cannery Row, East of Eden, Of Mice and Men, and The Grapes of Wrath, all of which have been adapted into celebrated films as well. The other writer, Joe Swerling, who did most of the adapting, also wrote The Pride of the Yankees and got an Oscar nomination, It's a Wonderful Life, and Guys and Dolls. He has many uncredited writing jobs. Writer Ben Hecht came in for the ending. He wrote Notorious in the original Scarface. He goes uncredited for his work in the 1967 Casino Royale. We discussed him in our review of For Your Eyes Only. He has lots and lots of uncredited writing jobs on big titles like Stagecoach, Prisoner of Zenda, Gone with the Wind, His Girl Friday, and Gilda. The music here was from Hugo Friedhofer. He's the composer of An Affair to Remember and The Best Years of Our Lives, and finally Airport, uncredited somehow. Cinematographer Glenn McWilliams didn't recognize much of his. He was the replacement brought in to replace cinematographer Arthur C. Miller, who also lit the 36 White Fang, Young Mr. Lincoln, The Mark of Zorro. Do you guys recall the last time we saw footage from The Mark of Zorro?
Was it in the Zorro, the Gay
Zorro
Blade?
the Gay Blade starts with clips of the original film, yeah. Because it's a pseudo-sequel to that film. How Green Was My Valley, The 46 Razor's Edge, Gentleman's Agreement, and A Letter to Three Wives. Editor Dorothy Spencer, before this she cut Stagecoach, To Be or Not to Be, The 43 Heaven Can Wait, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Cleopatra, and her last two editing credits were for disaster films Earthquake and The Concorde Airport 79. Tallulah Bankhead played Connie Porter. She also played a character named Black Widow on the original Batman series. This was her first film in 12 years, except for an appearance as herself in 1943's Stage Door Canteen. Later, she was Mrs. Trefoil in Die, Die, My Darling. And after she caught pneumonia on the set, Hitchcock wanted to reward her for her perfect performance with the gift of a puppy, which he had pre-named Alfred Hitchcock.
What?
It's just like, here's a puppy. It's also me.
I guess it depends on the type of dog.
Yeah, Hitchcock or Spaniel. I have no idea.
For some reason, I imagine him being like an English bulldog.
Yeah, maybe. William Bendix played Gus Smith. He was Fred Kelly in 17 episodes of The Overland Trail and Chester A. Riley in 219 episodes of The Life of Riley. He was also Buzz Wanchek in George Marshall's The Blue Dahlia. Walter Slezak played Willi. He was Melchior Inksa in Cornered, Yakov in Inspector General, and Arnett in Born to Kill. He's also played the Clock King on the original Batman series. Mary Anderson played Alice MacKenzie. Her first credit was Maybelle Merriweather in Gone with the Wind. We saw her last as Old Lady in Music Store in Cheech and Chong's next movie. John Hodiak played John Kovac. He was Ned Trent in The Harvey Girls. You remember The Harvey Girls? That was a fun one. And Jarvis in Battleground. Henry Hull played Charles J. Rittenhouse. He was Henry Cameron in The Fountainhead, Dr. Wilfred Glendon in Werewolf of London, and Doc Banton in High Sierra. Heather Angel played Mrs. Higley. She was the voice of Alice's sister in Disney's Alice in Wonderland. She was also Miss Darling in Disney's Peter Pan, and Ethel the maid in Hitchcock's Suspicion. Hume Cronyn played Stanley Garrett. He was also in Brewster's Millions as Rupert Horn. He appears in Cocoon, Cocoon 2, Batteries Not Included, The World According to Garp, and so far on the show, Honky Tonk Freeway, all of which also feature his wife Jessica Tandy. Canada Lee played Joe Spencer. He was the first cast in the film, better known for his stage work, and he shows up again as Ben Chaplin in Body and Soul. I think that's everything for Lifeboat. Thanks again to Carlos Mota for their generous contribution to the show. If there's any title you'd like us to review, our top Patreon tier includes a custom review of any pre-1980 title. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, we are Vintage Video Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Letterboxd. Where, as I've said before, you can find each of our full movie rankings for the year, and we can also be found at vintagevideopodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be discussing whatever you choose. We leave you now with a trailer for Lifeboat.
What's the matter with us? We not only let the Nazi do our rowing for us, but our thinking.
I thought this boat was abandoned.
Not by me, it wasn't.
Keep going, Kovac. There's more people out there.
See there?
Get the kid.
Give me the baby.
Where'd he come from?
Is he a crew member?
I never saw him before.
No problem. Throw him off.
Have you gone out of your mind?
Throw the Nazi buzzard overboard.
That's out of the question. It's against the law.
Whose law? We're on our own here. We can make our own law.
She's out there.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
You fools! Stop thinking about yourselves! Think of the boat!
There's a piece in here about some people that were adrift on a lifeboat for 80 days. Say, maybe we can beat that record.